A late afternoon in mid-December. The weak sunlight seemed to be pulling away from the backyard grass, leaving behind a trail of scattered shadows stretched across the white picket fence. In that almost motionless air, a black man was kneeling near the corner of a wall, holding a laptop in one hand, eyes fixed on an old network cable box. He was not in a hurry. He did not speak. He was just there alone in the yard of his very own house. From the second floor of the house, across the street, a woman stood behind a white curtain, unmoving, quietly, watching. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes never left the man. A few seconds later, she picked up the phone, speaking in a voice so soft it was almost like she was whispering to herself, "Yes? I would like to report something. There is a black man doing something to the network wires near the side of the house. I think he might be trying to break in." 12 minutes later, the wail of police sirens shattered the stillness. Two black SUVs slid into the neighborhood like a cold storm. The man still had not lifted his head, but the world around him had already begun to change. From that moment on, everything started to slip out of its natural orbit. No one knew that behind a phone call that seemed harmless was a truth that had been buried for months. His name was Jack Carter. He lived in house number 218 at the end of Hillcrest Drive, a street known as one of the quietest in all of Crestwood. It was a place where every porch looked like it was cut out of a home decor magazine, and where everyone knew how to smile at the right moment, but never too warmly. This neighborhood had no crime, no shouting, no scattered trash, and also not many black residents. Jack was an exception, probably the only unusual thing this place had put up with for years. He had once been a top student at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, graduating with a perfect thesis in computer engineering. After college, Jack worked for a major tech corporation in Seattle, where he was described as a quiet genius, the kind of person who could spot an error in code just by glancing at it. His future had once seemed bright, but life does not run on logic, it runs on loss. When his mother was diagnosed with cancer, Jack quit his job and moved back to Missouri to be with her. He became her full-time caregiver, taking her to chemotherapy, cooking meals, reading books aloud, keeping her alert through long, painful nights. He never complained, never asked for praise, because to him, love never needed to be spoken out loud. His mother passed away that winter, and after the quiet funeral, Jack stayed alone. House number 218 had once been their shared home. He kept everything: the wooden chair where she used to read, the old refrigerator that rattled the framed pictures she had hung on the wall. He switched to remote freelance work, lived quietly, never dated, never threw parties, never caused a bit of trouble for any neighbor. And maybe that was exactly what made people uncomfortable. Jack could not remember the last time someone actually started a conversation with him. He had tried back when he first moved in, still hopeful. He helped Mr. Green drag the trash bins into his yard, raked the leaves in front of Mrs. Cynthia's house, even fixed a broken fence for the Henderson family without asking for money. They all thanked him with a brief nod, never meeting his eyes. No one asked his name. No one invited him to the weekend barbecues like they did with other families. No one called him neighbor, just that guy who lives at the end of the street. Once he tried smiling at a little girl selling cookies for the Girl Scouts. She froze, glancing at her mother. The mother instantly pulled the child away. And from that day on, no one knocked on Jack's door again. Jack did not get angry. He did not ask questions. He learned to shrink himself, move slower, avoid conversations, never go out after 8 o'clock at night, never wear a hoodie, never put on headphones while walking, never stare at strangers too long. He became invisible, a shadow within his own space, but still he cared for the house as if his mother were still alive, fertilizing the garden, sweeping the leaves every afternoon, repainting the gate once a year. Everything was neat and proper, leaving no room for anyone to call it uncivilized. The saddest part, though, was this: no matter how much he tried, people always saw his skin color first. On those quiet afternoons, Jack would often stand on the steps, watching the sunlight stretch across the narrow path. He used to wonder if he were a white man, with the same job, same lifestyle, same kindness, would the neighbors look at him differently? He had no answer. But the longer he lived in that neighborhood, the more he realized no one needs to shout in your face to tell you that you are not welcome. Sometimes silence speaks loudly enough. And then one day, the Wi-Fi started acting up. Just a minor issue, but it was the beginning of everything. That day, he went out back to check the cables. That day, a woman called the police. And that day, Jack realized even when you live as quietly as possible, you are still the thorn in the eyes of those who never want to understand. The people of Hillcrest took pride in their sense of order. No one raised their voice, no one picked fights, no kids ran in the street, and there were never any late-night arguments. Everything functioned like a luxury timepiece, precise quiet, and never offbeat. But beneath that peaceful exterior, something else quietly lingered, a silent tension. Like a thin layer of dust on furniture, no one could see it, but everyone could smell it. Right after the incident with the police, Jack did not step outside for 3 days. He still lived still, ate, still worked, still watered the plants. But his footsteps no longer touched the red brick path. The second-floor windows of his house stayed shut all week, the curtains unmoving. And even though no one asked, everyone noticed. The looks he now received were not just cautious, they were watchful. On the 4th morning after the event, he came out to bring the trash bin in, just like usual. No one said anything, but behind the window across the street, someone had seen him. Just like always, not a single greeting, not a single question. Even though they had all seen him pinned to the ground, hands cuffed, knees on the cold concrete, right there in his own yard. But the strange thing was, no one took responsibility. No one came forward to say it was a misunderstanding. No one asked if he was all right. Instead, a kind of silence spread, like the entire neighborhood had made an unspoken pact to ignore something they did not want to face. Since the day he moved in, Jack had never heard anyone call him a neighbor. To them, he was the guy at the end of the street, the black man who lives alone. A distant concept tolerated out of bare civility, never allowed to be more than present but invisible. Mrs. Cynthia, the one who called the police that day, lived right next door in a house with a small yard enclosed by a white fence taller than her head. She had retired at 62, used to work as a cashier at the local grocery store. No one in the neighborhood was particularly close to her, but everyone knew she was always on alert, always watching, and especially sensitive to anything that moved near her property. She did not smile much. She did not talk much. Her face was always tight like a wound-up string, even when nodding politely. She lived with her son, Elliot, 28 years old, a tech engineer who rarely left the house and almost never interacted with anyone in the neighborhood. Every morning at exactly 7:15, her door would open so she could walk her dog around the block. No headphones, no texting, no side routes, always. One loop, always the same pace. If she saw a stranger, she would switch the leash to the hand holding her keychain, where a small can of pepper spray dangled. Jack had once thought it was just a habit, but later he understood to Mrs. Cynthia anything unclear was potentially dangerous. He had once tried to be friendly. A delivery truck had dropped off a box of fresh groceries at his house. By mistake, it had her name on it. Jack picked up the package, walked over, and knocked on her door to hand it to her. She took it without making eye contact, muttered a soft thank you, and closed the door. He thought that was the end of it. But 3 days later, a new security camera appeared on her front porch, pointed directly at his yard. No attempt to hide it. Jack stood on the steps, watching his shadow stretch across the cement, and realized in this neighborhood, a kind gesture could be seen as intrusion. A greeting could be mistaken for intent. A friendly nod might be all the reason someone needed to install surveillance. And above all, his skin color would always be noticed before his character. The others in the neighborhood never said a word, but their actions spoke louder than language. Every time Jack went outside to sweep the leaves, a curtain somewhere would shift. Every time he loaded something into his car, a gaze from a window across the street would linger. He could feel it. Not because he was paranoid, but because that look always lasted just a second too long, always carried a quiet unease. It was not outright hate, nor was it kindness. It was suspicion, as if they were watching a wild animal, even though it had never hurt anyone. He once heard a friend say, "Racism today does not lie in words, but in where people choose to look and how long they look." Jack believed that. No one had ever called him a slur. No one had screamed at him to leave, but no one had ever said his name either. No one had stood next to him for more than 3 lines of small talk. And like an unspoken rule etched into silence, the entire neighborhood had learned to keep their distance. One time he tried walking around the neighborhood in the afternoon, just like others often did. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, passing by each house where he had once helped fix a fence, mow a lawn, or pick up a dropped package. When he passed by Cynthia's house, he nodded no response. When he walked past Mr. Green's place, the curtains were quickly pulled shut. When he passed the Hendersons, the child who used to play near his yard was sharply called inside by her mother. He did not stop. He was not surprised. But his steps slowed for a beat, not because his legs were tired, but because his heart had skipped half a beat. He did not write these things down. He told no one. He simply collected them quietly into a chilling realization. Every time he stepped outside, he had to carefully choose who he would appear to be in other people's eyes. If he smiled too much, he might seem fake. If he stayed too quiet, he became mysterious. If he helped, he was trying too hard. If he did not, he was cold and unfriendly. He felt like he was playing a game with no rules, where he was always the one losing points first, no matter what he did. After the police incident, the stares grew thicker. New cameras appeared under more porches. Sometimes Jack would look up and count 4 different lenses pointed at him from 4 different directions. No one said it was because of him, but everyone knew. They might claim it was for safety or burglary prevention or emergency preparedness, but he understood they feared what they could not control. And in their eyes, he was the only thing in this neighborhood that did not fit the formula. Jack had once believed that if he did everything right, they would accept him. But after 7 years of living here, he had learned some doors do not open just because you are kind. Some walls do not fall just because you are patient. And some people, even the ones living right next to you, never really want to see you as human. There are moments that pass, yet their echoes stay suspended in the air like a thin, scentless smoke, shapeless, but felt by everyone. Since the afternoon of that siren, no one said anything, but every window curtain was drawn just a bit tighter. Every camera seemed to pan a little faster, and those once leisurely evening strolls were shorter and quieter than before. Jack could feel it in every step, in every glance that flicked past and turned away, in the vague caution of those he had once tried to call neighbors. And he knew once the thread of suspicion is tied, it drags worse things along with it, even if you have done nothing wrong. That morning was crystal clear, cold, and still so still that you could hear tires crunching over gravel in front of the gate. A police car arrived without sirens, without flashing lights, parking softly like an uninvited guest. 2 officers stepped out, one older stiff, his face unreadable badge gleaming under the pale light, Sergeant Wheeler. The other was younger, with a high and tight haircut, one hand never leaving his belt eyes, scanning everything on instinct. Ryan. They knocked with firm, steady raps, not rushed, not aggressive, but with the weight of something already decided. Jack opened the door, looked at them calmly. He did not appear confused, nor did he appear welcoming. His slight tilt of the body was enough for them to step inside without needing an invitation. "We need a few minutes of your time," Mr. Coleman Wheeler said, in a tone that sounded like it came from an old cassette tape, flat, emotionless. "There is a serious security concern regarding your network that we need to verify." Jack paused for a few seconds, then nodded, as if exhaling a quiet sigh. He pointed toward the desk in the corner, where the laptop still sat open with its screen glowing. They did not need more direction. Ryan stepped forward as if he already knew the layout of the room, plugged in a small device, a USB drive that looked like hundreds of others, but from it a stream of code began racing across the screen, blinking blue as if scanning for the blurry footprints of a digital past. Wheeler opened his notebook eyes, never leaving Jack. "Your full name, Jack Nathaniel Coleman. How long have you lived at this address?" 7 years. "Anyone else living with you?" Number, occupation, software engineer. Freelance. For which company? Various. Most recently, Cronex. Wheeler wrote each answer slowly, as if trying to catch a lie in the shape of the handwriting. Ryan was still hunched over the laptop, muttering now and then with a hint of frustration. Then he stood up and turned to face the other two. "There is a device that has accessed this router multiple times over the past 3 weeks. It is not part of his system. The MAC address was spoofed. The activity matches sniffing behavior, possibly trying to gather personal data off the network." Jack nodded. "I found it too. That is why I went out to check the cables." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You found it yourself. I am a security engineer." He squinted. "Graduated from MIT like the file says?" "Yes." Wheeler cut in. "Do you realize that behavior like this, if not clearly explained, can be seen as illegal network intrusion? It could be prosecuted." "And you think I hacked into my own network?" "We are not drawing conclusions. But the person who called the police said you were doing something suspicious, and right now we are not ruling anything out." Ryan nodded in agreement. "We handled a case just like this 2 years ago. Hacker used the same kind of device, also lived alone, also went to MIT. That case nearly burned down 3 homes from tampering with HVAC systems." Jack stared directly into his eyes. He did not argue. He did not explain. Just held that gaze long enough to make the other man uneasy. There is nothing more dangerous than someone who knows they are right but no longer feels the need to prove it. "We need to check further," Wheeler said this time, without asking. "Router, modem, external hard drives, television, smart speakers. Anything connected to the network." Jack lifted his head. "I have the right to refuse. We will come back with a warrant." He paused for a few seconds, then sighed lightly. "No need. Go ahead." And they did, as thoroughly as if they were searching the home of a suspected terrorist. Every hard drive was plugged in, every folder opened. Encrypted files, the voice recognition models he was building for a current project, were all scrutinized. Ryan opened a file containing an AI model and asked with suspicion in his voice, "What is this for noise reduction in voice recordings? Used in audio investigations. Who are you doing it for? For myself? Why? Because I can." Wheeler stood nearby, scanning everything with an expression that had shifted from suspicion to discomfort. The house was too clean. Nothing seemed out of place, no trace of wrongdoing, and somehow that only made them more uneasy. A man with the skills, the tools, and the discipline, but who revealed nothing. In their eyes, that made him someone capable of anything. When the inspection ended, Wheeler closed his notebook, his voice lower this time. "At the moment, there is no conclusive evidence, but as you can see, all of this needs further verification. That unknown device is not yours, but no one has determined whose it is." Jack said nothing. He did not say what he was thinking. He did not ask whether they had considered it might have come from another house, say the one next door, the one with the newly installed camera where Mrs. Cynthia's son had once studied network engineering. He said nothing, because he knew around here the questions were already answered long before anyone asked them. Before they left, Ryan paused at the doorway, turned back. "You work with networks, so I guess you understand there is no system that cannot be breached." Jack looked at him, lips curving just slightly, not a smile. "Which is exactly why I also understand some systems do not need hackers to break. All it takes is people putting their trust in the wrong hands." The police car pulled away from the street in silence. No one stepped outside, but curtains shifted. A few eyes peeked down from second-story windows, then quietly closed them again. No discussion, no objections. Just a silent consensus the inspection had been necessary. They did not need proof, just a feeling of unease. Jack stood on the porch a while longer, one hand resting on the doorframe. The sky was ash gray, the sun not warm enough. He turned back inside, shut the door, and sat down at his computer. The red message popped up again. "Unknown MAC address detected." He was not surprised. He did not block it immediately. He logged it, then placed his hands on the keyboard, eyes fixed on the screen, though his mind was no longer in the code. In a world where logic is supposed to triumph over emotion, there are moments when the emotions of the majority are strong enough to convict the innocent. And that is when he understood fear does not come from data. It comes from prejudice. The red text on the laptop screen kept blinking like the heartbeat of a silent illness. Unknown MAC address detected. Every time Jack opened his laptop, it appeared again, not as a technical alert, but as a reminder. A reminder that someone was watching him, even in the place that should have been the safest. That a flawless system could still be infiltrated, not by flaws in its design, but by the eyes that watched and the hands that hid. But this time, Jack was no longer silent. After the officers left, he began recording everything, capturing signal structures, mapping signal directions, analyzing distances and angles of the strange transmissions. This was no longer just defense. It was a declaration of war, silent, systematic, but deliberate. 3 days after the inspection, a technical specialist from the Cyber Investigation Division arrived at Wheeler's request. His name was Vincent Gray, slim-build, thick glasses, always wearing a Bluetooth headset, even when not on a call. Unlike Ryan, Gray did not bring suspicion in his eyes. He walked into Jack's home with a laptop wireless frequency scanner and a forensic network trace kit gear reserved for serious digital security cases. Jack stood beside him, saying nothing. They worked like two skilled mechanics dissecting a machine, cold precise. Gray began by rechecking all of Jack's devices. After 30 minutes, he confirmed everything in the house was clean. No spyware, no signs of unauthorized access to networks outside Jack's ownership zone. But what caught his attention was the direction of the rogue signal, a stable stream coming in at a 38-degree angle from the left side of the yard. Given that angle and distance, there was only one possible origin: Mrs. Cynthia's house. Gray did not say this aloud immediately. He built a coverage map remeasured with a signal locator, then confirmed it against the neighborhood's architectural diagram. After that, he removed his headset, turned to Jack with an unreadable look. "The device is not yours," he said quietly but firmly. "It is outside the active range of your network. In fact, it is coming in from the outside." Jack was not surprised. He asked only one question: "Can you pinpoint exactly where it came from?" Gray nodded. From the other side of the fence, the house to the west. Silence filled the room. The computer screen reflected both their faces, one thoughtful, the other, seemingly already knowing. Gray did not have the authority to search a neighbor's house, but he could draft a technical report for the police department. And he did later that same afternoon. The report was 37 pages long, complete with signal diagrams, access logs, wave scatter plots, and a conclusion the unauthorized signal originated from the western fence line, most likely a manually installed surveillance device. In short, someone had deliberately been spying on Jack from across the fence. Wheeler received the report the next morning. He read it carefully, said nothing for the first 10 minutes, then picked up the phone and called a familiar name: Elliot Cynthia Moore, Mrs. Cynthia's son, the only other person in the neighborhood besides Jack with the knowledge and technical skills to install such a device. Elliot had once interned at a cybersecurity firm specializing in internal surveillance systems for county-level government offices. His record was clean. No arrests, no violations, nothing that raised red flags except one habit known to everyone on the block. Elliot did not like people getting near his house, and he absolutely did not like Jack. The summons for Elliot was issued quietly. No media, no flashing lights, just a polite phone call inviting him to the station to assist in a technical inquiry. Elliot arrived on time, neat white shirt, black backpack, carrying his laptop. He showed no signs of worry, just the confidence of someone who believed he would never be suspected. That look only changed when he saw the thick report on the desk, his name printed on the third line of the title page, right below the phrase "Suspected Signal Source." The questioning began with easy prompts. He answered fluently, no hesitation. But when asked about a device with a matching frequency signature found near Jack's home, Elliot started to falter. He admitted he had a similar device used during an internship, but claimed it had been put away long ago. He could not remember the last time he used it. Then, before the officers could press further, he said something that made the entire room fall silent. "I just wanted to make sure he was not doing anything dangerous. He looked suspicious to me." He did not say Jack. He said he. Just 3 words, but they carried the full weight of the otherness the entire neighborhood had projected onto Jack for years. No evidence needed. No concrete actions, just a feeling. Just, he looked suspicious. Wheeler stared at him for a long moment, then closed the folder. "Elliot, do you understand that unauthorized surveillance is illegal?" Elliot swallowed, his voice less steady now. "I did not leak anything. I did not steal any data. I just wanted to make sure the neighborhood was safe. By spying on a neighbor, I did not do anything to hurt him. You installed a device, accessed a network, monitored the activity inside someone's private home. You do not think that is harmful?" Elliot had no response. For the first time, his face turned pale. His carefully built arguments could no longer shield him from the obvious: he had broken the law. Not in emotion, but in fact. The case was closed 3 days later. The report read, "Unauthorized signal-emitting device determined to be manually installed from the home of Elliot Moore. The owner admitted to the action but failed to provide a specific purpose." Investigation continues regarding level of violation. Jack received the notice from Wheeler via email. There was no apology, no line acknowledging that he had been the victim. Just a cold summary, official and sterile, written in the language of bureaucracy. Throughout the entire investigation, no one asked how Jack felt. No one stood on his porch to say, "We were wrong." No one knocked on his door with a cup of coffee as a peace offering, or even gave a nod the way humans usually do after a misunderstanding. It all passed as if he should have known this was the default price of not being like them. Jack did not rage. He did not sue. He did not go online to tell his story. He did not take any calls from the press after a local paper leaked news about the illegal surveillance case. He did one thing, only he stood in his yard, took down the small camera he had installed when the rogue signal first appeared, removed each wire, coiled them carefully, and stored it all in the cabinet. That night, he turned on the yard lights. They were not bright enough to light up the entire garden, but enough for everyone to see that he was there, standing tall, no longer hiding. For the first time in months, Jack did not lower his gaze when looking across the fence. And across the street, the lights in Mrs. Cynthia's house were still on, but the curtains were drawn shut. When someone has lived too long in silence, the moment they finally speak, their words are no longer soft. They grow thicker, raspier, but heavier, and more real, like stones dropping into the hearts of those who hear them. Jack did not know exactly when he started to feel that weight. Maybe it was the first time Mr. Green shut the door after Jack brought back a misplaced mail package. Maybe it was when Mrs. Cynthia turned away as he mowed her lawn. Or maybe it was that uncertain look on the young officer's face when Jack said for the 10th time, "I am just fixing my internet." Whenever it began, the feeling had stretched on like a wire that never snapped, a wire named restraint. And then one day that wire was stretched too tight to hold anymore. That was the day Jack decided to go to the police, not to file a complaint, not to demand justice, and certainly not to reclaim lost dignity. He came for one reason, only because he could not go another day without looking the man who had pinned him to the ground in the face and saying everything a human being deserves to say. That morning, the sky was the color of dull lead. Light rain fell like droplets of memory, too gentle to soak through a coat, but cold enough to cut through skin. Jack walked slowly from the house to his car. No bag, no laptop, no notes, no files. Just a small notebook he had been writing in for years, not to send to anyone, but to hold on to his sanity. At the city police headquarters, the receptionist paused slightly at his name, but she did not ask questions. She simply bowed her head, typed, and made a call. 10 minutes later, it was Wheeler himself, the officer who had led the search of Jack's house, who had read his file without breaking eye contact, who appeared in the doorway. His walk was steady, but he hesitated slightly when he saw Jack standing still, notebook in hand, eyes unflinching. Wheeler did not smile. He did not pretend. He asked plainly, "You wanted to see me?" "Yes, it will not take long. I just need a few minutes," Jack replied. Wheeler nodded and led him to a small meeting room at the end of the hallway. The room had no recording device, no surveillance camera. Just a round wooden table, 4 chairs, white fluorescent lights, and the damp smell of water-soaked wood. Wheeler sat across from him. Jack did not sit right away. He placed the notebook on the table, kept one hand on its cover, and looked the officer straight in the eyes. His gaze was not accusatory, not resentful, just indifferent enough to make someone uneasy. "I am not here to file anything," he began, voice even. "I do not need a reinvestigation. I understand how the system works. I just want, for the first time since I have lived here, for someone to listen to me. Not as an officer, as a person." Wheeler neither nodded nor shook his head. He simply looked at him. Jack sat down, hands resting on his knees, shoulders relaxed. He took a slow, deep breath and started speaking without looking at the notebook, because every word had already carved itself into his memory too deeply to forget. "My whole life I have lived in a way that would not scare anyone," he said slowly. "I do not play music loudly. I do not go out at night. I do not wear hoodies. I do not wear headphones while walking. I avoid walking too close to women after dark. I do not park near playgrounds. I do not borrow things. I do not step into other people's yards. I make sure no one ever sees me too suddenly. I learned as a teenager how to shrink myself in the eyes of others. To become so small I am not worth noticing. So small I could exist without touching anyone's fear." Wheeler remained silent, hands folded across his stomach. The light from behind Jack cast shadows over his face, making familiar features seem distant. No one said a word, only the soft sound of rain tapping against the window. Jack continued, voice steady but with a faint tremble in his throat. "I used to think, if I were quiet enough, kind enough, polite enough, if I avoided making noise, avoided making trouble, then people would see me just like they see themselves. As a resident, as an engineer, as a son, as a neighbor. But I was wrong, because before they see me as a person, they see me as a color. A cold wind slipped in through the window's cracked frame. Jack did not notice. He was walking a tightrope between reason and years of buried pain, and he knew he could not stop halfway. When the police came to my house, I was not surprised. I was not panicked. I knew it would happen. It was just a matter of when. Because I have seen people like me pushed to the margins for nothing more than a passing glance, and I had spent my whole life preparing for that moment, the moment when no one would see me as the victim, even though I was the one who had been violated. He paused, inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. You searched my house. You questioned me like I was the threat, while the person who planted the device was someone else. You told me I should understand, should be sympathetic, that the police were just doing their job. But let me ask you, when does a person get to question the job itself? When do we get to be trusted without needing to prove ourselves? When do we get to be called people before being called a risk? Wheeler still said nothing. He was listening. Not as an interrogator, but as someone who had just stepped into a space he no longer controlled. Jack bowed his head for a moment, as if steadying his breath. I am not here for pity. I do not want comfort. I just want you to know this suspicion can kill. Not with bullets, but with tiny cuts to dignity, to trust, to the feeling that you are allowed to exist. It kills with doubt. It makes people believe they are guilty even when they have done nothing wrong. He gently placed a hand on the leather-bound notebook, as if it weighed more than usual. For the first time, he opened it in front of someone else, not to share, but to show that some pain cannot be spoken. It can only be recorded over time. On the first page, the handwriting was clean and slanted, leaning right, as if each line had been written in long, sleepless nights, when all the cameras had turned off, when every curtain had closed, yet suspicion still hung in the air. No one needed to hear him read aloud. The way he flipped each page, held it like an artifact soaked in endurance, said everything. Each sentence was a wound that had once bled, only no one had seen it. He stopped in the middle of the notebook, turned a page, and nodded slightly as if confirming to himself what he already knew. These were not accusations. They were evidence of a life shaped by caution. This was the day the neighbor woman locked her door when he approached with nothing in his hand but a trash bag. This was the day a new camera appeared aimed directly at his gate one day, after he adjusted his Wi-Fi antenna. This was the moment when Mrs. Cynthia accepted the food delivery he carried over, but her eyes said he had made an unforgivable mistake. This was the list of times he returned after bringing in the trash bin and noticed the neighbor's curtains shifting ever so slightly. And finally, this was the day he was handcuffed in the fading afternoon sun of his own yard just for trying to fix his internet connection. He did not read those lines out loud. He did not need to. He simply closed the notebook, placed both hands on the cover as if thanking it for holding what people refused to hear. Then he looked Wheeler directly in the eyes, for the first time, not with a plea to be understood, but with the expectation of an answer to a lifetime of being forced to live within the rules of fear. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I got a good education, lived clean, stayed kind, stayed quiet, avoided being different, then maybe one day people would stop seeing me as a threat. He paused, eyes steady on the officer. But Wheeler, let me ask you honestly, if I were a white man living in that same house with that same router and those same actions, would you have broken in? Or would you have just knocked and asked if I needed help? Wheeler said nothing. His face, so used to handling tough cases now, betrayed a tension he could not hide. Something in his eyes dropped, not from being accused, but from realizing, maybe for the first time, that silence too can be a form of wrongdoing. Jack stood up but did not leave. He knew he was not finished. There was still truth pushing to the surface. I have never frightened anyone, but my entire life I have had to live in fear, not because I broke the law, but because I was never trusted. If justice is to be fair, it cannot depend on personal feelings. It must be based on truth. And the truth is, I live trying not to be noticed. Yet, I am still seen as something that needs to be removed. So what more must I do just to be accepted as a normal human being? He did not wait for a reply because he knew no answer would be honest enough. Jack picked up the notebook, but then stopped. He left it on the table. I am leaving it here, not for anyone to read, but to remind you that some things never make it into a file, but they still leave a mark in memory, a kind of evidence you cannot deny. He turned and walked away. The door closed behind him without a sound, but inside the room grew heavy as lead. Wheeler remained seated, hand resting on the notebook. He did not open it right away. Something held him back, not because he doubted what was inside, but because he knew, once he read it, he could no longer pretend he was just a bystander. That day, there were no notes entered into the police record, no report, no updated case file. But everyone in the building remembered clearly the man who walked out in such silence that the hallway paused for a moment. No one said anything, but everyone understood something had changed, not in him, in them. That afternoon, the sky finally cleared. For the first time in many overcast days, sunlight broke through the heavy gray clouds and lit the quiet streets. Jack drove slowly without rush. The trees along the sidewalk seemed to appear brand new, as if he had never truly seen them all these years, because his eyes had been too busy dodging the stares that tagged his skin as dangerous. That evening, he did not draw the curtains. The living room lights were on, not bright, but warm enough for passers-by to see the man was home. He was not hiding, not running, and for the first time he did not feel the need to prove anything. He sat in the middle of the room holding an old book, reading in silence. Not to pass the time, but as a quiet reminder to himself, he had the right to be at peace. Across the street, Mrs. Cynthia's house went dark early. But the camera was still there, pointed directly at his porch like a wound that refused to heal. Jack did not look at it. He no longer needed to, because today he had looked at something far more important himself. He did not need validation. He did not need a pat on the back. All he needed was to live as a human being. And for the first time in that quiet little house, he knew he was no longer afraid. On the first weekday morning, beneath the quiet chill of winter, two unmarked vehicles slid silently into the neighborhood like ghosts. The door to Mrs. Cynthia's house opened. Elliot stepped out, hands cuffed, eyes bloodshot. There was no resistance, no protest, just a young man crumbling beneath the weight of something he once thought was justified caution. In the preliminary indictment, the act of installing surveillance equipment, even under the guise of preventive safety, was deemed a violation of privacy and a breach of Missouri state cybersecurity law. But in the eyes of those present that day, this was more than a legal matter. It was the inevitable result of a fear that had been quietly nurtured for years, an unconscious fear of Black people wrapped neatly in the label of community safety. Jack did not step outside to look. He knew they were there. But that morning he made tea, played a soft instrumental piece, and sat quietly on the sofa. Not because he did not care, but because he was tired. Tired of living for so long as someone under surveillance despite never having done anything to warrant suspicion. The door across the street closed. The vehicles drove away. And in that moment, a letter appeared on his doorstep, handwritten envelope, shaky ink. No sender name. But Jack knew it could only be from Mrs. Cynthia. He opened the letter just as the sunlight warmed the window pane. The paper held only a few lines, but they made the man who had endured for years Pause for a long time on one sentence. I am not afraid of you. I am afraid of what society taught me to think about you. There was no apology, and there did not need to be. In those frail strokes of pen, Jack saw a truth that many others never dare admit. Sometimes evil does not live in action, it lives in silence and assumption. Sometimes what kills kindness is not a weapon, but a look of suspicion that never had a reason. He folded the letter and placed it inside the book he had been reading. Not to preserve it, but as a reminder, he had not imagined it. The things he had felt were real. In the days that followed, the air in the neighborhood seemed to shift. There were no loud discussions, no arguments, but the heavy silence that once hung over Hillcrest began to lift. A few people started to look at Jack when they passed by. Some gave a small nod. Others only glanced, but no longer looked away like before. To others, these gestures may have seemed trivial, but to Jack, they were the first cracks in the invisible wall that had surrounded him for 7 years. One morning, as he rolled his trash bin to the curb, he noticed Mr. Mark, the man who lived 3 houses down, waiting at the corner of his yard. They had never spoken beyond a polite nod. But today, Mr. Mark approached. He brought no cookies, no flowers, just a single sentence, I have lived here 15 years. But only last week did I start to ask myself, what I have been silent about. Jack did not reply, but his gaze softened. Mr. Mark was not asking for forgiveness. He just needed to hear himself say what had sat too long in his heart. Then others followed. A young mother walking her child gave a quiet bow of the head. A group of teenagers playing ball on the sidewalk no longer looked away when he walked by. Someone left a message in his mailbox, I used to think you were suspicious just because you didn't talk much. Now I realize, I'm the one who needs to rethink things. Jack's story began to spread. A local newspaper published a short piece calling the incident a case worth reflecting on, about unconscious bias and the cost of silence. At first, Jack did not want the article released. He feared being labeled a victim, feared being made into a symbol. But then he read the comments, hundreds of them, not just from Crestwood, but from across the country. People shared how they too had felt the same, judged by skin color, by clothing, by silence, by mere existence. A woman wrote, "My son is 16. He is afraid to wear a hoodie in public. Your story made me rethink how I've been teaching him to stay safe in a society where safety often means silent suffering." A man added, "I used to be a police officer. I once asked for a black man's ID just because he looked at me too long. I forgot about it. But now I remember, and I feel ashamed." Jack did not respond to those comments. But every evening when he came home, he left the curtains open, as if to say quietly, "I am not afraid of your gaze anymore." The following month, Elliot appeared in court. The sentence was not severe probation, with 180 hours of community service and a mandatory bias re-education program. But what stayed with Jack was not the penalty. It was the way Elliot lowered his head while exiting the courtroom. No excuses, no deflection, just the face of someone finally confronting a truth he had never believed was real. That danger does not always lie in action, but in the willingness to label someone a threat, simply for being different. After the hearing, Jack left through the back door. A reporter followed, asking if he wanted to make a statement. He shook his head, offering a polite but firm smile. He did not want to be a symbol. He just wanted to live like any other person, something that for years had seemed far too out of reach. At home, he opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph. His mother, the woman who raised him alone, who battled ALS until her final breath. She had never let him see how much she suffered. She only ever reminded him, do not let other people's fear define who you are. Now he understood her words more deeply than ever. One afternoon, as sunlight spread over the porch like honey, a group of high school students knocked on his door. They carried a large hand-drawn poster, an illustration of a bridge with scribbled letters at the top. Bridging silence, starting with truth. A white girl with brown hair tied back spoke softly. "I go to the school nearby. Our teacher told us about your story. My friends and I would like your permission to paint this on the wall of the neighborhood library. Would that be all right?" Jack did not answer right away. He looked at the group. Some met his eyes. Others looked away, shy. But in all of them, he saw something he had never seen in this neighborhood for 7 years, a willingness to understand instead of fear. "Yes," he said, "but only if the mural does not mention my name. It has to belong to everyone." On the day of the painting, a crowd gathered Mr. Mark, the young mother, even some who had once avoided eye contact with Jack. Together they mixed paints, held brushes, and painted the first strokes of a bridge that connected two sides, one lined with shuttered windows, the other glowing with light and laughter from a community learning how to open up. A week after the mural was completed, another letter appeared in Jack's mailbox. No return address, no postal stamp, just a folded sheet printed in black ink on plain white paper. The first line read, "I used to fear what I did not understand, but now I fear silence more." No name, no signature. But Jack knew someone in the neighborhood had written it. And more than the words, it was the anonymous silence breaking that moved him. Because in a world where everyone fears being seen through judgmental eyes, the courage to speak up, even without a name, is already a brave beginning. Jack placed the letter inside his old leather notebook. Not to preserve it, but because every fractured silence deserves a place to be acknowledged. He had once written in that notebook out of isolation, out of frustration at cameras rising behind his back, out of the loneliness of always needing to prove he was harmless. Now, it also became the place where he recorded the signs, however small, of change. On the weekend, as sunlight danced across the cracked walls, Jack stepped out onto the porch. For the first time in years, he placed a small table and 2 wooden chairs out front the way other families often did, to read the paper, sip coffee, or simply watch the world go by. For him, this was not just enjoying fresh air. It was a quiet declaration: I am no longer hiding. The first to pass by was the old man who sold newspapers. He paused, surprised, then handed Jack a weekly journal. Jack accepted it with a quiet smile. A young woman jogging stopped to ask for water. A boy on a bike slowed down, looking at him a little longer. Small things, but none of them had happened in the past 7 years. Then came the familiar footsteps. Mrs. Cynthia, her silver hair neatly pinned back hands, empty, no bag, no letter, no camera. She stood at the edge of his yard, not coming closer. Jack stood too. Between them was a distance, not far in feet, but long in years of silence, like a canyon. "I have a few things I want to say," she repeated, then paused. Jack did not rush her. The two of them stood there in the morning light, as if the things that needed to be said had been held in for so long that they now tried to escape, not through words, but through silence. "Elliot is my son," she began. "He grew up on the stories I told him about staying alert, being cautious, seeing anything unusual as a warning sign. I thought I was teaching him how to survive, but in the end, I was teaching him to fear people who are not like him." Her voice cracked. "I used to be afraid of you, Jack. Not because you did anything wrong, but because I knew nothing about you. And this society taught me that what I do not know, I should stay away from. I am sorry." Jack looked at her for a long time. Not to judge, not to decide whether to forgive or not. He simply listened, and in that moment he saw that the woman before him was no longer the guarded neighbor behind the tall fence, but a mother, a human being who had also been misled by a system she did not fully understand. "Thank you," Jack said. Just 2 words. But in them was the weight of all the years he had waited for someone, anyone to speak from the heart even once. After that day, Jack still lived alone. He did not join the neighborhood meetings. He turned down television interviews. He never posted his side of the story, but he started doing something new, writing letters by hand to every family in the neighborhood. Not to complain, but to share what it felt like to be the different one in a place everyone else called home. 1 letter, then 2, then 10. Not everyone replied, but doors slowly began to open. One afternoon, Mr. Mark brought over a cup of tea. On another day, the young family across the street invited him to their son's birthday party. No one spoke of the past, but the way they looked at him had changed. No more avoidance, no more suspicion, just presence, full, natural, unjudged. By the end of summer, a group of students from a nearby law school reached out to Jack. They wanted to start a course on unconscious bias and use his story as a real-world case. Not to teach others, one student said, but to help people learn how to listen when someone says, "I am tired of being feared." Jack agreed, but he asked to change the name of the course. He called it No More Silence. The first session of No More Silence was held in a small community room inside the district library. Jack did not speak. He sat in the back row watching. The speakers were the students themselves, young people who had once believed racism only lived in history books until they saw it seep into everyday glances and gestures. One student shared that, after hearing Jack's story, she went home and noticed her mother always locked the car doors when a black person walked by. She did not blame her mother. She just asked, "Why do you do that?" And her mother had no answer. That became the start of a conversation, hard but necessary. Jack did not give a speech that day, but he left behind a folded note on the podium. When the session ended, a student opened it and read, "Do not pretend not to see color, because doing so erases everything a person has had to endure. Look and understand. Then act with conscious kindness, not because you are a good person, but because everyone deserves to live without proving they are harmless." The class ended, but its ripple did not. Some students proposed expanding the program to other neighborhoods. Some wanted to write articles. Others talked of making a documentary. But Jack simply smiled and said, "I will be here. And if needed, I will not be silent anymore." That same day, something strange happened. When Jack returned home, the camera that had pointed at his house for nearly 2 years, Mrs. Cynthia's camera was gone. No explanation, no mention. But Jack understood some apologies do not need words. On the small table out on his porch, he placed a new notebook. The old one had been given to a lawyer who promised to preserve it as a record of what should never have happened. The new notebook Jack filled with deep blue ink. No longer notes of being ignored, feared, or watched, but of small moments, someone nodding hello in the morning, a quiet thank you at the coffee shop, a wave from the neighbor's child. They were small things, but each line, each word was proof of a shift, slow but real. And then one day, as autumn settled over the city, Jack walked through the park. Sunlight streamed through the trees, casting long shadows across the path. A white girl, maybe 8 years old, approached with her fluffy, cream-colored dog. When she saw Jack, she paused. He hesitated, an old reflex, still preparing him to explain himself. But the girl looked up, smiling brightly. "You are the Wi-Fi guy, right? My mom says you are really good with technology." Jack smiled, a light, easy smile. For the first time in years, he saw himself not as a shadow people avoided, not as a threat people prepared for, but as a person seen clearly without doubt. He leaned down to pet the little dog and nodded to the girl. Yes, I fix Wi-Fi. But now I do something else too. What is that? The girl asked. Jack stood up, looking toward the sunlit path ahead. I rewrite silence. The story ends there. But for those who listened, who witnessed, who were left silent by the way, one man lived with quiet dignity in a world full of suspicion. This is not an ending. It is the beginning of a new way to see, a new way to live. A world where truth, though once buried, finally finds its place. If this story made you pause, if there was even one moment that made your heart ache, leave a comment. It does not have to be anything grand. Just a line, I have listened. Because maybe that is what Jack waited for his entire life, and what so many others have never been given. Click like if you believe truth should not be silenced, and share if you think someone else needs to hear this story. Every share, every comment, you are helping give voice to what is right. And if you want to continue with us on this journey of telling stories that help the world see itself more clearly, click subscribe. We will be back not just to tell stories, but to listen with you.